Yes, thank you, Patrick. So, welcome, a little late, to the International Society for Research on Solitude seminar series, seminar number 11. And it's amazing, isn't it, the colleagues and friends who've been here before? This is the 11th all online seminars that we've had. Roughly one a term, so two, three, four a year. But this is the 11th. We are I am Julian Stern from Bishop Grosseteste University, and I'm joined by Gosia Wawejko and Rafa Iwański, who are from the University of Szczecin in Poland. Gosia is with us, is the vice president, is in charge of vice, so that's why it's all gone wrong, of course. And Rafa is actually in charge of the technology. Thank you, Rafa. And he is the secretary of the ISRS. And we're introducing Keri who will talk about, I'll say something before I ask Keri to start, Beyond Voice, Listening and Silence in Climate Change Education. I mentioned something about the International Society. For people who don't know it, there is a website. It is currently down because the university is revising its whole web and it's down for another 5 hours, it tells me. But we have a marvelous website, and on that website you will see, Keri, you will see the advert for the seminars, but also the recordings of seminars included on the website. The seminar is being recorded, so if people wish to be silent or absent, that is fine, of course, or turn their cameras off. If after the seminar you decide you don't wish to be seen at all on the website, please let me or let Gosia or let Rafa, one of us, know, and we can pixelate you or cut you out of the recording. It's also got information about all sorts of other things. That's the web address, the ISRS from the University of Szczecin, uszz.edu.pl, and there is a email address for that. Normally, if you search for ISRS, it'll get straight to it, but not for the next 5 hours. As well as doing the seminar series, we published the Bloomsbury Handbook of Solitude, Silence and Loneliness, 32, I think, marvelous chapters on solitude, silence and loneliness, done with a lifespan approach. So there is section 1 on solitude, section 2 on silence, section 3 on loneliness, and each section starts with young people and goes through to old age. In the case of loneliness, goes through to death as well. So marvelous from many, many disciplines, education, philosophy, psychology, business studies, linguistics, all manner of disciplines represented, many other disciplines represented there. And Bloomsbury kindly invited us to create we asked them to invite us to create the Bloomsbury Solitude Studies series, which I was mentioning to Iris earlier briefly. I'm one of the series editors, as is Dat Bow in Australia. Dat is a second language teacher specialist. I'm a educationist, philosopher, religious education. Axel Seaman in America is a philosopher, and Gosia Wawejko is an educationist, philosopher, theologian, many things as well. And this Solitude Studies series is remarkably for Bloomsbury not labelled with any single discipline. So it is open to any discipline and will be advertised to people in an appropriate disciplinary list. So a book that's published by Julian Stern, that's me. It was the first in the series, The Art, Literature and Music of Solitude, which my university is the head of English at my university is claiming as an English studies book, which is fine. And there isn't a music department anymore, so that's why the English department's got that. The second book that's published in that series, Sandra Versace's Solitude, Silence and Loneliness in Adolescence, The Teen Who Stands Alone, with another nice front cover. That's the second book, and we have half a dozen other books coming in that series as well. So it'll be advertised, Sandra's book will be advertised in the psychology lists. So at last, and I'm guessing I should shut up. It's always difficult to shut up, isn't it? And let Keri in turn be silent for us in the face of the climate crisis. Keri is a professor at the University of Bristol, at SLU Uppsala, and has roles in various other universities beyond voice, listening and silence in climate change education. And so I will stop sharing this and go over. I will stop sharing this if I can find a way to stop sharing. That's the button. And over to you, Keri, and you can guide us how you wish us to proceed.
Thanks, Julian, and thanks everybody for inviting me here. Just to say that I think what I'm going to do is simply read this paper and invite you to sit and listen. I'm not going to be sharing slides. I'm going to take the luxury of working with colleagues who have got a focus on silence and solitude and listening. I anticipate that you don't need visual stimulation. Just to say a little bit about me, I work on long-term futures and education. I've spent since about 2017 working specifically on climate change and its implications for education. And this paper that I'm going to read today came out of, to be honest, a deep frustration with being asked to write a piece on climate change and education again. And a frustration with the continued failure to hear what's been said many times before. I'm really excited to join this group. I wasn't aware of the work of this group before I wrote this, which is my own fault, not yours. You're doing amazing things. And so what I'd like to do is just read and see where we resonate with each other, see where the connections are. It would be helpful to me because I get easily distracted if people are able to stay on mute during the session, if that's okay. And also just if you want to turn your cameras off and you'd like to just listen, then take this as an opportunity to do that. Maybe we create a little moment of stillness in what I'm sure are very, very busy days that we all have. I should say also that this piece was inspired by a book by Terry Tempest Williams called Finding Beauty in a Broken World. And it is a book that is written in a mosaic structure. And I think when I started writing this, I had a sense of the impossibility of just writing another paper, another long form narrative that was just going to say the same things. So all respect to Terry Tempest Williams for that book. So a mosaic is a conversation between what is broken. It's May 2023. Can I add anything useful? I'm wondering. I've been invited to write a paper on climate change education. As part of our briefing, we were asked to read and respond to a previous special issue of the Journal of Moral Education on the topic of sustainability education. This previous special issue in 2012 proposes principles of care, complexity and interdependence, recognition of the sovereignty of nature unto itself and our potential as collective and social beings. And it invites us to learn beyond Western traditions, to reimagine ourselves and our students as part of something greater. Need I add anything to this? I wonder. Many people have already said and said beautifully the things that need saying. The same principles have been echoed in literature, from climate activism to UNESCO reports to speeches at Davos. Many people have said what needs to be said many times before. It's been said repeatedly. It has been written again and again in books and journals. Scholars, activists, and scientists have been relentless in what has needed saying. It has been endless. For as long as I've been alive, and I was born in the same year as the UN Conference on the Environment in Stockholm that first made this case, what has had to be said has already been said. Namely, a new relationship is needed between people and planet, between human and non-human beings of this world. It has been said by eco-psychologists and environmental scholars, by environmental educators and educators for sustainable development, by Indigenous leaders and system scientists. In other words, humanity has known for many years that we are not sufficient unto ourselves, that we eat, breathe, sleep, sing, sigh, because we are part of a world, not outside it. It has been said, but not heard. This is not a problem of ignorance. So why write another thing? I begin to wonder, what more is there to say? What form of speech and writing is commensurate to a problem that is not a problem of ignorance? Since the last carefully curated, thoughtful special issue of this journal on environmental education in 2012, the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have increased from 393 to 420, continuing to breach the safe limit of 350. 75% of children in a survey of 10,000 children around the world in 2021 stated that they were scared of the future. Last night, an old friend asked me again whether I thought her kids would be okay. World Overshoot Day, the day in the year when our consumption exceeds what the planet can handle, fell in December in 1971. In 2023, it fell in June. Less is necessary. The number of academic papers published has grown 22% in the last 10 years. Last year, there were 5 million papers published. We produce more text. We accumulate more books. We gather words, tending to them as though they will help us ward off the dangers, solve the problems. They're totemic and ritualized. If we just write the right thing, find the right story to tell, we can make it all work. We must make it all work. I ask ChatGPT, what is the role of the human in the age of the Anthropocene? It obliges me with an answer in about 20 seconds. It offers, spooling onto the blank page, a list that any environmental educator would be familiar with. It happily, I assume, I project, collates what we know, what we've been writing and shouting about in the years since that UN conference, and it pools humanity's online expertise in a series of numbered bullet points, complete with a summary and the necessarily modest caveat that perhaps there may be other sources to consult. In the context of the Anthropocene, it tells us being human takes on new responsibilities and dimensions. Environmental stewardship, interconnectedness, systems thinking, technological advancements, ethical considerations, adaptability and resilience, collective action. Being human in the Anthropocene requires a shift in our change in perspective and a re-evaluation of our relationship with the natural world. So says ChatGPT. These are the words of our new Silicon collaborators, the collaborators we made for ourselves. They're the words of those who would become our colleagues, already inviting themselves into our collective we. The fact that we have these new digital partners able to make these arguments and collate our existing knowledge also demands that we ask today, what needs to be written and said by us? I note that the rapid response of AI offers a speech without silence, without stutters or pauses, save the temporary flickering of the cursor as the fluent response is marshalled. Perhaps it is the empathy and compassion of listening, the stuttering difficulty of finding the right words, the distinctive shape of our silences as we struggle to birth new thoughts into language that is demanded of us in a world where our machines can produce endless text at the speed of thought. Perhaps then we need silence. What if instead of writing, we need to create spaces for listening, making spaces of silence for something new to be heard? What if the story we've been telling all these years of a new need for a new relationship with the other people and beings of this planet demands a cracking open of this carapace of words and an opening to other voices? What if this means that silence, our silence, my silence, our students' silence is what is required so that we, our students, can learn to open ourselves to and hear these other voices, feel this world, sense into together the possibility of a collective response? And I'm not alone in making this case. Gilles Deleuze argues we are riddled with pointless talk, insane quantities of words and images. Stupidity's never blind or mute. If less is necessary, if silence and listening are necessary, this poses a challenge to an author invited to write and speak about climate change education. What form of writing might interrupt the habits of a university culture oriented toward the constant, endless, ceaseless production of speech, words, and texts, from the first week of an undergraduate degree to the final great text of the last great professor? Shall we take a moment, you and I, to listen, not to the words forming in our heads as I write and you read, but to the rest of the world around us? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? What do you see? So goes the mantra designed to warn off panic attacks and bring us again, as Bruno Latour, amongst others, invites us back to earth, down to earth, into our bodies, into the world. The week I write these words, 5 billionaires drown in a submarine visiting the wreck of the Titanic, and the news is full of concern with whether the exploratourism industry is suitably regulated to protect them. The same week, hundreds of people died in the Mediterranean, in a fishing village, heading for Europe, locked below decks, again. An octopus farm has just been set up on the Canary Islands. The farm will produce 1 million octopuses each year, cramming them into tiny pens, these deeply intelligent creatures who prefer solitude, and then freezing them alive for the food market. The latest IPCC report states widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. Rapid and far-reaching transitions across all sectors and systems are necessary. What sort of listening is required to allow us and others to hear these words, to allow them to land in our bodies in a form that takes root and invites a living response? What form of listening do we need to allow us to notice and feel this news? Lisbeth Lipari, the communications scholar, tells us that listening begins not with understanding or information, but with compassion. Listening, whether to trees or people, she suggests, entails the recognition of another self, the startling presence of another being, a not self. It brings a recognition of an unknown other to whom we are bound and about whom we feel care and concern. Silence, Salome Vogelin argues, is not the absence of sound, but the beginning of listening. What sorts of silences enable that recognition of the other? What sorts of silences are needed to open to listening? 2 months before I started writing this piece, I sat at the bedside of an old woman who was dying, her soft hand in mine, her pulse ticking in her wrist, her head back against the pillow, folds of skin resting beneath her slack jaw. And around her, a family listened intently. The quality of silence that comes from listening for a word before death. She asked for a cup of tea and revived for a little while. The Irish bards Martin Shaw and Tony Hoagland tell us had schools in which young men would lie in the dark with stones on their chests, composing and then revising their poems overnight, through the next day, through the black of the next night, before beginning to write. The words came from a deep silence, from a listening for the new old poetry that would arise. On a hillside overlooking the sea in California in 2012, the artist Scott Pollack invites an audience to a performance. Into a roped-off area, tickets sold in advance, 8 people enter and are asked to sit in silence, turn off their phones, and watch the sun go down. In life drawing, the student is told to draw the negative spaces between. It's these that make the shapes of the body. In letterpress printing, as they carefully extract pieces of lead type from a gallery of fonts, the printer learns that spaces take different forms. The spacing between letters ranges from the quad, a 4-point wide confident block that marks a clear delineation, to the sliver of thin copper that shimmies letters apart. Spacing between lines, the leading, comes in many sizes, often cut by hand, uneven. The spaces in old type hold histories. There are different qualities of silence. Lisa Matzai tells us that if we pay attention, we learn that each silence is inhabited. Listening, however, is itself silenced in much writing on environmental education. Where listening should be in the indices of key texts that might guide environmental and civic education, there are absences. In the 271 pages of the UNESCO publication, Issues and Trends in Education for Sustainable Development, the word listening appears only once in relation to a community radio project. And even when silence is ostensibly the object of practice in environmental education, listening remains strangely absent. Consider the conclusion of this essay on silence in environmental and sustainability education. Good critical environmental and sustainability education creates in-between spaces for individual and social transformation, where participants speak and are spoken to on an equal basis and with respect for their uniqueness about their concerns for environmental commons. It is an open-ended and democratic practice that carefully navigates between a sense of urgency and the need for moments of silence, serenity, and space. Students in this example speak and are spoken to and are invited into moments of silence, but such silences are framed as the absence of speech, not as a space for beginning to cultivate listening. Nor is there a sense that such listening might be an ethical practice of communication of equal value to speaking. That listening might be a critical form of democratic and social participation. Perhaps our emphasis as environmental educators on speech and voice is not surprising. 50 years of environmentalists struggling to be heard at the edges of power, in the corners of corporate offices, at the margins of the curriculum, might well encourage a demand to be heard, a call for voice. And indeed, it is tempting to argue that now is the time for a reversal of old patterns and voice and silence, for environmentalists to do the talking. But the search for speech without equal respect for the responsibilities of listening brings risks. As Lipari argues, among the innumerable ways I can fail to respond ethically, the communicative subjection of the other to myself is perhaps the most hidden. This is where I insist on understanding on my terms only and hold fast to my cognitive preconceptions and categories, simply assimilating what I already know or think I know about the other and his or her point of view. Such failure to listen manifests in material and environmental harms. Power without listening in the name of climate action and at a time of deep competition for land, for example, risks reproducing the extractive and violent relationships with land pioneered by the fossil industry and industrial agriculture. And we can see this happening in indigenous countries around the world. Equally, the confident certainty of climate science expressed without listening to the situated lives and challenges of communities on the ground risks alienation of large swathes of the population. from environmental concerns. It is possible to reject the violence of the gag, the suffocating blanket of censorship, without forgetting the importance of listening. Silence, and working intentionally with silence as a source of listening, does not necessarily mean oppression, and the equivalence that has been created by these two concepts may be part of our struggles, of our troubles, if we struggle to hear the world and each other. The challenge for educators concerned with creating more sustainable worlds, then, is not to teach our students to claim the power to speak at all costs, but to offer what Ian Riles and Bob Jickling describe as space for new ways of thinking, valuing, and doing, space for contextual differences, and space for allowing the life world of the learner to enter. Such spaces will necessarily demand new forms of encounter, attention, and listening, what Lipari describes as interlistening, which suspends egocentricity for an opening to intersubjectivity, the unpredictable and foreign land of the between, a listening that opens to the possibility of the emergence of something new and the encounter with the other as other. For Lipari, such interlistening, or listening otherwise, is listening not merely for an exchange of signs or receipt of information. It is a process of defamiliarization in which we renounce the familiar and embrace the strange. This is listening as a collective practice of inquiry, a collective opening up of space for new ways of thinking, being, doing, valuing. Such listening is generative. It creates new relations between interlisteners. This new relation, in Lipari's terms, is a whole in and of itself. It is the us too of Tyson Yunker Porter that comes through dialogue and mutual reflection. It may be the I thou of Martin Buber. This silence that generates mutual listening, that invites a listening to the world, political theorist Kenan Ferguson argues, does not distance, resist, or overpower. It forms the artistic and intellectual basis for the recognition and constitution of communal identity. New worlds might be made through such listening. Such listening, however, demands vulnerability. As Gemma Corradi-Fiumara writes, in our concern for listening, a demand for change is made upon us. Unless we are prepared in some way to become different from what we are, listening cannot be understood properly. To listen, then, is to allow the world to touch us, to change us. This vulnerability is physical. We cannot see listening, we can only feel it. Its waves resonate through our cells. Sound ripples and flows through our organs. Words, gestures, and movements land physically in our bodies. Listening is affect and cognition, relation and individual attention. The voice of the other, says Lipari, is a wave of energy that surrounds me, enters me, mingles inextricably. Moments of listening, then, can be understood as embodied encounters, in Sharon Todd's terms, as moments of affective contact, blending aspects of new sensations that are not yet categorized into subject-object or into perception as information. Listening, says Lisbeth Lipari, brings humans into being. This is the opposite of passive, the opposite of oppressive. To invite listening, then, is an invitation to be touched by the world, to witness its resonances in my own body and mind, to open to difference without seeking to control, to encounter with compassion, to create new relations that exceed any one of us alone, and to become human in a world of other beings. What might this mean, then, as researchers and educators concerned with questions of climate and education? To concern ourselves with creating conditions for the epic courage needed for transformational listening? This, to me, is a question worth asking. For academic practice, perhaps this means a refusal, a resistance to the incessant call to speech and text, or at least a greater discernment about when and where such speech is needed. Perhaps we might attend to our discourse footprint and its consequences in community as much as to our carbon footprint. Perhaps it demands a reframing of what it means to speak, what I recognise as a contribution to a classroom or an academic debate. And perhaps for academic practice, this means a recognition as well of the limits of the university and its broken promises of driving transformation towards sustainable futures. And for schools and colleges, for the moral and environmental education that are the focus for this special issue. Well, Helen Lees has already documented the powerful ambiguous potential of silence in schools. For civic education, Ken and Ferguson's work makes a case for the powerful emotional, theological and political sustenance offered by silence. And Michael Bonnet's work has invited attention to the necessary practice of the silent witness of the natural world. Such work points for educators concerned with civic education to the necessary of complementing practices such as student forums, councils, assemblies and protests with others that foreground the importance of silence as a form of encounter. In the end, however, my attention in this essay lands less on silence in itself than on listening as an intentional practice that is birthed in silence of many sorts. I'm drawn to the question of whether we can foster in our classrooms and lecture halls the embodied and vulnerable practices of interlistening that might open encounters with the other. Understanding the forms that such practices might take will demand interdisciplinary inquiry. But more than this, creating the conditions for such practices, if they're to be more than pedagogic tricks and tips, may also require a transformation in what we ask of educators. If cultivating listening as a form of encounter and an opening to the world demands the cultivation of vulnerability, then it's not just students, but teachers who need to feel safe enough, supported enough, spacious enough to listen in ways that might crack open their hearts or challenge their deeply held assumptions, allow them to feel the limitations of our current relations with nature and with each other, and create time and space to respond to that feeling. Teaching listening in schools then will also require a politics of listening. Who gets to have the time and space and permission to listen deeply and with care? What institutional shifts might be needed to enable this? Why are these practices actively impeded? In the meantime, other ways need to be found to seed listening virus-like into practice. And it's with an account of this, of one practice that gestures towards what might be possible, that I finish. Each month, I sit in circle with between 7 and 13 others. Some are colleagues, others are friends and acquaintances. Together, we observe a simple set of guidelines derived from a now 60-year-old practice known as the Way of Counsel. These guidelines are speak from the heart, listen from the heart, lean speech, spontaneity, confidentiality. In the circle, we invite stories, and to tell them we pass, in our case, a stone between us, speaking only when it rests, warmed by the hands of our colleagues in our own hands. We do not plan in advance what we will say, but we focus instead on the stories being told, giving our full attention to the speaker, allowing their stories to touch us, allowing ourselves to open to them. When the stone lands in our hands, then we ask, what story serves this group? What is it necessary to say and no more? We talk only from our own experience, from what we've learned through our own lives. And when all the stories are told, we listen together for themes that emerge, or tensions, or wisdom, and we invite new questions and prompts to deepen into what is emerging between us. This circle is, for me, a lesson in learning to listen. It is hard. I struggle to listen to others as I grapple with the narcissism of my own stories and the habit of judgment. I also know that this listening is powerful, that I can carry an image or story from one of our councils with me for months or years. I know that as I leave each council, I carry with me a renewed awareness of the latent multitude of stories in each person, each life, and of the themes that weave them together across difference. And above all, I know that I am becoming comfortable with the silence that's required for myself and for others, to listen to others and to the stories that I need to tell. Bayo Akomalefe and Marta Benavides argue the times are urgent, we have to slow down. Listening is a slow practice for urgent times. It is a bet without guarantees that in the patient attention to the other, old stories might be witnessed and let go. and the soft voice of something new wanting to be born might be heard. Thank you. Thank you for your patience in listening. Thank you for the quality of your listening. And maybe we all just take a little moment to sort of see where that lands for each of us. And then maybe I invite Julian or whoever else wants to hold reflections together for us. Otherwise, I have some ideas.
Anna, it would be lovely to hear from you. I once did a seminar on solitude, silence with Helen Lees, and she started with silence, and the chair said, "No, you can start now," and "No, you can start now," and she had to tell the man, "No, this is silence. This is what we want." So
sorry.
I'm delighted to start with that, and then to what would you like to say, or Anna?
Now I feel ashamed to speak up.
No. We're fine. It's all good.
No.
It's all good. It's all good.
Well, the idea that you have presented in your speech have reminded me the idea of indigenous university, pluriversity. I don't know if you have ever encountered this idea. I had this opportunity only because of my trip to Colombia last month. Frankly speaking, it was a very unique experience because I found out that what you said about mosaic, I believe that we might already have some answers for questions that you have asked in your speech. The concept presented by you reminds me of the assumption of mosaics, and they call it pluriversity, which I met in the Misak University in Colombia, and it consists in the reversing of perspective on which the unifying teaching of Western university is focused. This reversing relies, among others, on ecological education based on the inclusion of the indigenous concept of so-called economy directed towards justice and harmony into academic teaching. And in economy directed towards justice and harmony, we are dealing with non-human actors, non-human geographies, and with unmonetized models of ownership, with barter economy. This harmonious economy is focused on the nature of balance in relation between human and non-humans in order to maintain harmony between humans, Mother Earth, the cosmic powers, and Mother Nature in all her aspects, like people, like water, air, insects, plants, and animals. And in past, not only did the Misak listen to other people, but they also listen and communicate to human and non-human others. Like they believe that their ancestors had distinct languages to communicate with animals and plants. This idea of pluriversity goes beyond post-colonial and emancipatory education and goes beyond Western education. So my idea when I was listening to you was that maybe we could also go beyond Western model of academia, of the unifying monism of university, and learn ecological education by listening to the pluriversity. Because it is not that they exclude our Western academia, they also teach about Western biology, Western idea of ecology, economy, but at the same time, they teach their own ways and their own ways of their own perspective.
That sounds like a very interesting example. I mean, I've done quite a lot of work on pluriversal thinking and connections with kind of more than human others in other ways. So yeah, I can see that. I can see that connection. I suppose one of the questions that I have at the moment around this, because there's a lot of appeal to engage with Indigenous knowledge systems, is I wonder I think this is a question for all of us, is what does it mean to be located in Europe, for example, in relation to Indigenous knowledge systems? How do we ensure that we're not simply borrowing ideas internationally and bringing them back to Europe again? What would the practices of Indigenous knowledge systems look like in each of our, in each of our traditions, and also in recognition of the violence, the colonial violence that we've inflicted on countries that we're now turning to, if you like, for survival. So I think there's a very complex and interesting politics about that relationship with Indigenous knowledge systems. I completely, it's a really good connection.
But on the other hand, in Europe, we have also this idea of folk universities, folk high schools, and they also, in some way, they also they apply to our folk knowledge, to the regional knowledge, yes, and the ways of thriving, and you know what I mean. So maybe this is the way. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I suppose I'd be interested in, you're all specialists on silence, which I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't aware of. So I suppose one of my questions is my assumption that quite a lot of what I was saying in there, you would just take for granted. You're like, yeah, of course this stuff's important. But where do you see a connection with what I was saying? How do you understand the difference between silence and listening? Maybe you have a sense of where silence fits specifically in relation to the environmental issues that I've talked about.
I was interested in, just as you're describing it, a distinction between silence and listening. And I was going to ask, but you've answered already, do you see a role for silence that doesn't involve listening? And for me, listening means I have a frown on my face. I am listening. Silence, my face. Well, I always have lights, but silence can be done without an effort to listen. And you may hear when you are not listening, and so on. So some of the practices, Quaker practices perhaps, are intended to withdraw from an attempt to listen, so that in Quaker traditions, the spirit moves through you or not. The spirit moves you or not. And so I would be interested in how you saw the role of silence without, perhaps it's because teachers shout at children, listen, in a way that's an aggressive, not a good form of silence either. But when people tell me to listen, I think I have to do something, whereas being silent, I don't.
I think wouldn't that be fun to just sort of explore the sort of repertoire of modes of listening and hearing or silence, and be a bit more able to distinguish between those. I'm not sure I associate listening with having a frown on my face at all. So I think it is a mode of attention, and I think it's a mode of active reception, as I understand it. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're listening, particularly when we think about the way Lipari and Fiumari, Gemma, forgotten her surname now, talk about it. They're actually talking about an openness and a vulnerability that to me is precisely the opposite of the kind of invocation of power that happens in a classroom, where the teacher is like, listen to me. This is where I think we need to kind of release listening from that particular dynamic but also I don't think it's the same. It's clearly not the same as silence. It's a kind of attentiveness, an open attentiveness, and a willingness. I actually do think there's an effort to listening that attempts to not control what arrives with us. And I think particularly for academics, this is hard, because we are trained absolutely to say, how is what's being said connected to what I already know? How can I connect to what's already being said? How can I kind of jump on it or pick up on it or respond? There is an effort, but it doesn't need to be a frown, to listen in a way that I think is vulnerable and that is open. And And I think it's got that sort of inner quality as well of Quaker listening. I mean, the council practice was massively informed by Quaker practices as well. So there's a lot of similarity of the lineages here. Does that, I mean, you know,
Yeah,
I think this is the conversation that we need to have, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I love the idea of, do you know, Keri, of Anne Piry's work on, she wrote a book called Virtue and the Quiet Art of Scholarship, Reclaiming the University. And the idea of virtue and the quiet art of scholarship is a lovely idea, that scholarship can, and I think she says should, be a quieter art than the ego-driven scholarship that you're describing in universities and schools as well, and with educators and or people generally.
I mean, it feels to me, it's funny, you know, I've just come out of back-to-back student tutorials all afternoon, and you know, I'm very aware of the limits, I think, of the structures that we're operating in terms of creating a capacity for students to really open to new ideas, because they're so oriented towards certain particular outcomes. And then I can feel myself not being able to take the time to really listen to hear where they're coming from as well. So I think there's, you know, there are structural issues. I suppose the bit in this paper that I really want to pursue further is, I think, the question of the politics of listening, and the fact that actually structurally the capacity for listening in silence is intentionally eroded and closed down in most spaces. And I'm curious about why. It's just, that's the sort of little niggly thing that I'm now trying to think about what we do next. But I don't know what your experience is, but I mean, I know that when I sit in council and I come into universities, I'm just shocked by our training out of the capacity to be open to ideas. We're trained to critique, particularly in Western traditions, which is like the training in the kind of jumping on whatever arrives. So you know, this stuff, you know, this paper was very much a sort of first off the top of my head entry into all of this, and it's a sort of opening out of an area, and I haven't done much with it since. So I'm just interested in whether you think there's anything that it connects with you, or where you think I might go with it next as much as anything else.
Oh, that's wonderful. Will other people have, sorry, I'm looking across my screen, I realise you're in different positions. I was wondering, Gosha, I know, has written on the ineffable in education. In other words, just recognising there may be an ineffability is also a way of recognising some of the limits of how we both talk and listen to people, that there is something separate or quiet or ineffable in.
I'm a big fan of the ineffable and mystery, just for the record, and at the same time, I think we can learn to listen differently. I think there's actually quite grounded practices, you know, and I think we can call out behaviours. You know, I think some of this is about the ineffable, and some of it is just just that we are so trained into certain ways of being in the world. And I mean, my specific focus was on the climate change education side of things, where all the emphasis for the last 5 years has been on, don't worry, we don't have to do anything as adults, because as long as we engage young people and they raise their voices and go out in the streets, everything's going to be fine, which is frankly nonsense. And yes, yeah, I mean, Iris, you're saying, no, that's not the focus. I agree with you. Lots of education for sustainable development have not been saying that, but that has been a kind of very prevalent fantasy, particularly just prior to the pandemic. Don't worry, Greta will sort everything out and get the young kids to raise their voices. And the emphasis on voice as the strategy for achieving change, to me, just seems wrong-headed politically. The problem is not with voice. The problem is not with knowledge. The problem is the intentional resistance to hearing this and to allowing it to land in our bodies. And the people who are not hearing it and allowing it to land in their bodies have been educated by our universities. You know, this is not a problem, as David Orr says, of ignorance. This is a problem of highly educated people who are running large fossil fuel companies, governments, and so forth. So, you know, to me, this is a kind of political question as much as a spiritual question.
Yeah. Wonderfully, ambiguously thinking as a sort of chair. There are people here who are quiet. Do I wish to interrupt them and say, Patrick, Iris, Aneta, Rafa, Unia, and Piotr, who have not yet, and Gosha, who have not yet talked, is there something you would wish to say? And if there is something you would wish to stay quiet about, good, that too. Iris.
Well, I wrote down, do you know the work of Pablo Muruzabal Lamberti? He wrote a dissertation with the title Befriending the Ears. I think it's a beautiful title. The transformative power of listening. He wrote it in 2023 at the University of Amsterdam.
Oh, brilliant.
So that might be interesting
Iris,
for you.
could I ask that you send us, myself or Gosha or Rafa, the reference so that we can send it to people? That sounds fascinating.
Yeah,
So now in the
If you
chat,
have
you
it
mean?
after, you can do it later, not now. You can do it after.
Okay, then I sent it to
the
Rafael.
event. Yeah, yeah.
And he was, yeah, okay,
And we
I
can
will.
put it in the notes of the meeting. That sounds fascinating.
Thanks,
I will.
Iris. That's really useful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been yesterday I was teaching about Nell noddings to undergraduates. Oh, I'm sorry, Unia, you have your hand up. I'll say that afterwards. Unia.
Okay, thank you. So I think in just listening to the presentation and coming from a practitioner's perspective, one who works with young people and communities on issues of climate change and sustainability, then I was thinking about how we can be very much involved in doing. So our doing is our way of speaking, and you know, we sort of move from one project to another project to another project without stopping to just reflect and think about, is this making sense to us? Is it making sense to the people that we are trying to reach out to? Yeah.
So thank you, Unia. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this writing came from hanging out with a lot of people working in social movements around climate for a while, seeing very high levels of burnout as well, as people feel, you know, increasingly stressed, increasingly exhausted at trying to make a change in a world that doesn't seem to be listening. And what I see happening there is that people feel like, you know, it's that raising my voice louder and louder and louder. Will that work? And so I think in relation to what you're saying, to me, it feels like there's two moments of listening that we might want to cultivate more. One is really trying to listen and understand where people are. And here I'm talking, there are different groups of people I'm talking about here, right? It's a whole bunch of fossil fuel industries that we need to find ways of challenging. But if we're talking about working within communities, what is it that people need? What is it that they're working on? And how can the work that we might be doing around climate issues actually respond to people's needs? So it's starting with a process of listening to where people are at and figuring out how climate and ecological questions can serve or can connect with or can build relationships with other agendas and other pressures that people are working on, so that it's not us just coming all the time going, you know what, whatever you're doing, the climate thing wins, all right? Because it's not working. You know, we've been doing it for 50 years. That's not working as a plan. Just doesn't. Gets people's backs up. But the other issue is this question of inner listening. So your point about going faster and faster and faster, and we go from one thing to the other. Absolutely. How do we create a rhythm in the nature of the work that we're doing that allows us not to get stuck in just, you know, atrophy, but that allows us to build a relationship between action and reflection? So we go into some things, we do some stuff, but then we take the time out. We listen. What have we learned? How do we make sense of what we've learned? How do we sit in council to sort of gather the collective wisdom of what it is that we've been doing before we go back out again? And that feels terrifying to do when we look at the numbers, when we look at the realities of the kind of ecological species lost, when we look at the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so I understand it's a very, very scary thing to do. To say we're going to take time to stop and reflect, listen internally and listen to other people. But to me, this feels like part of the process. I don't know if that helps or connects with what you are. I mean, I don't know whether that resonates with you, Yunia, or whether you're like, no, that's a crazy thing to say.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry for being silent till now, but I am silent because I am really struck. I'm really touched by this text very, very much. And I want to thank you, Keri, for this article. It is very moving for me. And it really resonated with my actual stage, I would say, of my, let's say, of my life and of my, I don't know, scientific development and of my searching. And I think that I will spend some time with your text, some more time. And I also find it really, I would call that contemplative, your article. And I also love this mosaic form at that very beginning. It touched me already, this mosaic form, that it is that piece of art, that it is formed from something that was previously ruined. And that was lovely. And I loved it really. So thank you very much, Keri. And actually, I have maybe a strange question and semi-private, but you mentioned at the end of your essay, you mentioned that circle of friends, of people. I don't know whether it is at work or is it a private group. And that was my question. How did you form it? Is it a private group? Is it a group of friends, or is it at work? What is it? Because I was like charmed by this idea of telling stories, of being so attentive to each other. Maybe because we had a nice chat at work today with my colleague, and actually we regretted that pretty often relationship, official relationship at work, at university, between people are not as good as we wished to be. And maybe therefore I just miss our relationship to be that honest, that attentive, and that's why I was so moved by that. Could you please share a bit more about that circle and passing on that stone and that story, please?
Thanks, Gosha, and thank you for your kind comments. I really appreciate those. I was very scared writing this. Well, not scared is too strong, but it was a bit of an academic risk to write this and to just be vulnerable. But I was very lucky because Michael Rees and Janet Orchard, who were editing the special issue, supported me, and they said, yeah, it's fine, you go for it. So I want to say thank you to them for supporting me to be able to write in this way. And it definitely felt the only thing I could write at the time. So anyway, in terms of the council, so I would suggest having a look. There's a practice called the Way of Council. It's a very long, old tradition, and it takes many different forms, and it's being used in schools and universities in lots of different places around the world, although I don't think it's used as much as as it could be. It's a ceremony as much as it is a practice. I came across it. I went and trained with, and I'm still mentored by a wonderful woman called Pippa Bondi in North Wales, who I have to give credit to. And she has been holding counsel for 45 years. She's got a deep, long-standing knowledge of this practice. And I came across it, and I thought, well, I need this. This is necessary to me. And it also feels in our present time, this is necessary possibly for other people. So in terms of setting it up, I have friends inside the university and outside the university, and I simply sent an email to those who I thought might be open to it and said, would you like to try this for a year? So not forever. You don't have to come and do this thing. You're not signing up to any particular belief, but just for a year, would you like to sit in ceremony with me, and we will do this together? And Pip has mentored me through that process. And I'm now just thinking about setting one up formally within the university, because it feels to me that it would be fascinating. What I notice is that those of us who sit in council together outside the university, when we are in the university together, we are different. And the way that we speak and the way that we listen is different in those settings as a result of that. And because we've got that shared experience, when we're in the work setting, we can be different with each other. So I mean, I have a depth of understanding of these people, and they have of me, because I don't just, it's not a practice that you facilitate, you're in it, I am, and they're in it, we're in it together. So it's not that hierarchical structure, it's one of a kind of mutual collective learning and collective wisdom, which, I mean, Julian will know from Quaker practice, it creates something different. So
yeah, it is amazing that it is linked to your university still. So it is something amazing that it is, established in a connection to university. So I would dream about something like that, in a connection with university, because it could improve our relationships.
Well, I'm very happy to talk with you more about that if that's something you want to pursue.
Thank you for
so
that.
much.
Thank you very much, Keri.
I saw Patrick Bond's hand, and then Iris, and then Anna. Patrick?
Shall I go? Oh, all right. If I may speak as somebody who's not in the university, I've spent most of my life not being in the university, and I studied for a PhD for various reasons, but not to become part of an academia. 3 or 4 questions came up. How to teach people to listen with their bodies, how to allow people to dethrone the intellectual, analytical side, and to listen to those very faint vibrations that come from within. I remember somebody saying, who was deaf and depended on either reading the Bible or listening via sign language. And she said, when I read the Bible, that's one thing. When I see it through sign, I feel it in my body. So there's something I think we have forgotten, the skill of listening. We used to do it for everything. Before printing, before writing, everything was learned by rote. It was learned by listening, and we had that facility. I've been speaking to a little group of elderly ladies from my church since 2007, and those who hadn't departed this world are still listening to me read poems. I believe that poems on the breath are the only way to really absorb and to react. That's one thing. Carl Rogers and his teachings on how to be present with a client. With Rogers' theory, the client is the only one who speaks, really. Your job is to be present and to fully engage with that person, their story, and to reflect it back. and how on earth you reflect something back without your own assumptions and preconceptions framing what you say. That was the art. It was congruence, to be absolutely honest, so that your outside was the same as your inside reaction. Empathy, to feel it from their angle, and unconditional positive regard. So that is compassion that does not come from your deep wells of sympathy, but comes from elsewhere. It's greater. So to hold those three things in balance meant that you could listen and you could be present. And it didn't usually happen. It had to happen, well, it would happen just now and then, but your client would then know that you were there and they would say something. And so that was my experience of nearly finishing a training, a very intensive training. As a poet, I've been working on a theory of open heart poetry, where if I'm trying to find words, I mustn't find words. I must not conceive of what it is I want to say. I must allow the words to come, and they do come, if I'm fully present, which means being absent to myself. So all of that, that's another aspect of being silent, but not passive. I think that was it. I set myself up as, and I have no ambition as a poet, but I have been writing for 60 years. I assigned myself the title of the poet of the nature reserve where I used to live, and I would go there for a whole day once a week for a whole year. And this pocket nature reserve was very small. You could walk through it in 10 minutes. So to hang around looking at things for a whole day was really, I found myself walking slower and slower and slower. And eventually I found myself walking backwards because the birds would all be there, but they would only pop out when you weren't looking anyway. So this I'm also associating with the religious idea of silence and prayer, because in prayer you're not trying to say words, you are trying to be fully present and to listen to something else that is non-temporal. So there's another Western cultural assumption that we have about the linearity of time and all those other assumptions. If you get rid of those, there are other connections to be made. So I think I'll shut up as a non-academic.
Thank you so much for those beautiful observations and connections. I found that very moving, and I'm very grateful. Yes, thank you for the connection to Rogers. I will go off and do some homework around that. I think that sounds really powerful. The sense of listening with the body, I think, is one that I was talking with a dancer yesterday, and we were talking about what does it mean to listen and to extend with the body. So that to me feels like something that really is absolutely central to this shifting away from the kind of pre-interpretation of what we're hearing. And again, it's something that I think our schools and our universities select against, because they select for the people that can speak rapidly and respond. And I've been one of those. I've decided that I think my practice for the last however many years, half a century, has been, to think fast and to feel sort of belatedly. And I'm now trying to figure out, okay, so what would it mean to allow what's being said, or to allow what's happening, to notice the feelings first, and then to decide if there are words that are necessary in response to that. So all of this to me is a kind of deep and ongoing practice and a massive unlearning of certain habits without losing the value of those, but just it's a decentering, isn't it? It's a dethroning. I think that was the phrase you used. The phrase we use in council is listening from the heart, and we invite ourselves really to say, what does it mean to hear from there? And the practice of witnessing, I'm pretty sure there must have been a psychoanalytic tradition that also formed the kind of interesting lineage of that practice, because the practice of witnessing is the hardest practice in council, as we sit and we hear the stories, and we witness back. What did we hear? And it's a really difficult practice to learn. So I'm really grateful for those connections. I will think of you as the poet in the nature reserve. I just think that's beautiful. So thank you. As a very, yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Thank you very much.
We have Alexandra Dmitrovich, who presented a seminar, is a psychotherapist in a broadly psychoanalytic tradition, who writes and talks on silence in future situations now, is doing that now. Iris, apologies, you've had your hand up for a long time.
No. Okay, two things about listening with your body. Maybe the French, I don't know if she still lives, Luce Irigaray, a French philosopher and also women's studies. I think she should have written about these things. So that might be interesting.
Yeah.
And when you said now the emphasis is on voice to get things changed in education, it reminded me of the movement XR, Extinction Rebellion movement. It started 5 years ago in England by a student, just one, who sat on the ground at the university campus and started this huge movement nowadays to protest against the climate crisis. So until now, they or we sit on the highway, just sit and do not say anything. So maybe it would be interesting to connect and get more acquainted to this movement.
Well, I'm very familiar with XR.
Okay.
I spend quite a lot of time, with them and the associated practices, and actually quite a lot of my point is precisely to be in dialogue with XR. So, because actually XR is a very vocal movement. It's a movement that is often very much. So I think Fridays for the Future, which started with Greta Thunberg sitting on her own outside the Swedish Parliament, that practice of silent witness is a very different one, I think, in the most cases, from XR as a practice, which is much more vocal and much more present. So maybe it's taking different forms in different countries. In the UK, that, I work in Sweden and the UK, and they have very different traditions and different practices. And I suppose, I think that one of the reasons I wrote this was really to try to intervene in some of the ways in which the XR movement was being brought into schools. And it was being brought into schools with the principle of raising your voice. It was tied into the kind of democratic education tradition, which has been associated with having a voice in the public sphere. And I suppose one of the things that I'm trying to say is that having a voice in the public sphere is not actually something that most young people are struggling with at the moment, because we've got a huge amount of voice out there. What we're struggling with is for people to listen to each other and see how they make sense with each other and negotiate and trust and build relationships. So I think I was explicitly trying to speak into that community a little bit, and also to the academic community, because do we just need to be writing any more papers? Is that really what we need to do right now? Is that adequate? Is that commensurate to what's going on? So, thanks, Iris. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing there, because it's long, slow work to keep doing that sitting, that witnessing, that silent being present. It's really, really important work. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And can I invite Anna, who's, again, you've been very patient.
Thanks a lot. I was impressed about what you said about this council, this group of people, the group of listeners. But I would like to refer once again to pluriversity, the idea of pluriversity, because in my opinion, this is what pluriversity is about. We introduce to academic settings different types of communication, different and types of communication rituals, practices that are not common for university, you know, that are not common and typical for the hierarchy in university hierarchy. And this is what actually you have done. Yes, you created pluriversity, we might say, yeah, because it was so different from what we call university. So this communication was so different. That this was my first comment. And another comment that appeared, that popped in my mind while listening to you, was that communication is always about listening. There's no communication without listening. If someone doesn't, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, Anna, go on.
And maybe we could also learn to listen animals. Maybe we could introduce to our even academic communication, the interspecies communication, not only intercultural communication, but interspecies communication. We know about felinotherapy, the therapy with use of cats, hippotherapy when we communicate with horses, but it is possible to learn to listen to animals.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that. And interestingly, the way of counsel was developed in California in the 60s, and it was developed as part of a social movement process to try to bring peace at a time that felt full of conflict. And there were Indigenous leaders amongst the group. There were anthropologists like Joan Halifax and others who came together, and they drew on Indigenous knowledge traditions and on Quaker traditions and on anthropological insights from all around the world to develop this practice. So I'm not surprised that there's a resonance across. In terms of listening to the other beings, yes, I completely agree with you. I mean, finding the right way to do it. Look, there's one here joining us. Yes. Anita's is joining us. So sorry, just to say, Anna, the work of Michelle Bastian and Julian Brigstow and Tarana Norsini have done a wonderful literature review on what would it mean to do participatory research with, they call it more than human others. So it might be, what does it mean to participate with dogs, with bees, I think, were the two groups that they were working with, and also with water. So what does it mean to listen to these other beings? So there is some emerging practice in there. It's stronger or weaker. And again, I mean, to me, I think the really interesting question for those of us sitting in Europe is how do we learn from traditions from around the world but not appropriate them? How do we go deep? And that reminds me actually of the point that you made, Patrick, about poetry on the breath. For the last 5 years, I've been learning oral storytelling. So we've got deep histories of stories that can be recovered and discovered where we are. And I think it's important for us to try to find the stories and the complex mixed stories, not in some kind of weird nationalistic folktale nonsense, because these stories all traveled as well. These stories picked up knowledge and information from different places, but to draw on those as resources again for us in our practices of listening, but also they have embedded in them in many, many ways, insights and practices in listening to the more than human world as well. So yeah, it's very important stuff. Thanks Anna.
I was yesterday teaching Nell Noddings to some undergraduate group. I'm talking about a view that if you care, ethical care always involves mutuality. So you can give care to people or things, but ethical care is mutual. So you are open to being cared for by the other if you care ethically for them. And that I would like that she didn't particularly apply that beyond human beings to the environment. If you care about the environment, that actually to me means being prepared to be cared for by the environment. In other words, listening is built in. I think we think of care as a power game, and Noddings is aware of the power games in care, but the necessity for it to be ethical means to be able to listen. I would say, as an academic, academic curiosity should be care for what we are studying. So listening to the things we are studying, the people we're studying, not just taking things from, whether it's texts or taking things from our research, but actually shutting up and listening and caring about what we study, and an ethic of care. I think Nodding's ethic of care is a very good one for the need for silence and mutuality in relationship.
At that point, I think we should recognise the care for each other of time, and spot that we're a little bit over time, and wrap ourselves up a little bit just to not cause any stress as people try and juggle many different things for today. I'd like to say thank you so much for the invitation to join you, and I've deeply appreciated the conversation, and I hope that we can stay in touch and continue to share ideas. So thanks ever so much for your listening. I appreciate that. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Keri. Thank you so much.
Thank
It's been
you.
wonderful to see you.
Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.